My Heart Knows update on Monday 25th of April 2022 on Z World. Episode starts with Malhar coming to the cold storage room searching Kalyani and looks at the big freezer. He thinks if Rachit has locked Kalyani inside, thinks he can't do such a cheap work. He thinks why my heart is shaken up and breaks the ice on the top of the freezer, but she is not there. He thinks I am thinking wrong, no man is stone-hearted to put a live girl in the freezer. He shouts Kalyani and opens the freezer in which Kalyani is kept and hits the ice with a sharp-pointed thing. He finds Kalyani's clothes piece and gets shocked. He shouts Kalyani. Main Yar Saya, plays. He picks ice with his hands and throws down fast. He then moves the ice with his hands and sees Kalyani inside shockingly. He finds her frozen and unconscious. He shouts her name and takes out the ice off her body. He lifts her and asks her to open her eyes. He checks for her heartbeat and thinks she will be fine, she is breathing. She calls doctor and asks for ambulance. Doctor says it will take 30 minutes. Malhar thinks he has to do something and takes her out. He asks a man if he will get hot water anywhere. The man says her condition seems to be critical and asks him to take her to Divine Sarovar where water will be warm and says she will be fine. Malhar runs and takes her there, prays to Devi Ma to save her. He sees some woman doing puja there. He walks inside the pond and makes Kalyani dip in the water, to make her normal. He asks her to open her eyes. Kalyani opens her eyes and faints again. Malhar gets worried and asks her to open her eyes. He gives her mouth-to-mouth respiration and asks why you are not listening to me. He shouts Kalyani, and asks her to get up. He says I am yearning to hear your non-stop talk. He asks her to look at him and asks why you are angry as I agreed to live with Sampada. He says even I was doing acting. He says Moksh is my son also and I won't let you go from my life. He says when we got married in wrong circumstances, I was burning inside whenever I used to see you. I used to remember Sampada's betrayal, but your goodness has won my hatred and then you became my habit, then need and love. I never know when this happened. He says whenever you used to call me, I used to get irritated, but whenever I didn't receive your call, I used to wait for your call. He says I can't live without you, you have become part of my life. He asks are you listening and says Kalyani, I love you. Kalyani opens her eyes. Malhar says I love you and smiles looking at her. He asks are you fine and looks at her smiling. He asks her to say something and asks why you are not saying anything. He says you got surprised hearing this, but this is truth, I love you and can't live without you. He says I will take Rachit's life, had put you in freezer and tried to kill you. He says I brought you to warm water pond to make you fine. Kalyani stands up. He tells that when he saw her in that state, he got worried and told the truth. He says I love you so much and can't live without you. He says he has hidden his feelings from her for a long time. He asks, you might be thinking how I fell in love with such a girl who talks non-stop, eats my brain, does something first and then later, get ready to sacrifice herself for others. Such girl is foolish, but this is right, I love such a foolish girl. He says you wanted someone to propose you in a filmy way. He says as you wanted. He bends down on his knees still in the water and says I love you Kalyani. He kisses her hand. Kalyani smiles and is surprised. Nainan Niba and he Kai's door replays. He gets up. Kalyani says nothing is important to us than Bilu, says you have to accept Sampada for Bilu. Malhar says what do you think that Moksh is just your son, says he is my son too. He says maybe I can't do that big sacrifice which you had done and tells that they will save Moksh, but he will never accept Sampada. Kalyani says you have to accept Sampada for Bilu. Malhar says nothing is difficult now and tells that Sampada can become his baby's mother through IVF without physical intimacy. He says I will convince Sampada for IVF, Moksh and I need you Kalyani. Malhar asking Kalyani to trust him and says nothing will happen to their son. He says Moksh and I need you. He says we will fight together and asks her not to leave him. Kalyani hugs him and cries. Mile High Tum Humko Babe Nasibo say, Aao Sahib asks Aparna not to protect Sampada and asks her to tell where is she? She says Sampada tried to separate Kalyani and Malhar. She says it is good that I came to know else Anupriya and Kalyani wouldn't have told me for Moksha's sake. She asks her to tell where is Sampada? Aparna says I really don't know where is Sampada and what she is up to. Sarthak comes home sadly and tells that he couldn't find Kalyani. Just then Malhar brings Kalyani. Everyone get worried for her. Malhar says Aao Sahib asks what did Rachit do with her? Anupriya asks where is Sampada, tell us something. Kalyani hears Moksh crying and goes to room with much difficulty. Madhav asks Malhar to hold her. She takes Moksh in her hand and he stops crying. Kalyani says I won't let anything happen to you, you are my strong boy. Anupriya, Malhar, Aao Sahib and others come there. Anupriya asks Kalyani to trust Malhar for Moksha's sake. He says Malhar explained us everything, he will convince Sampada for become a mother, says we're lucky to have in this era where a woman can become pregnant without physical relation due to science technology IVF. Kalyani asks if nothing will happen to Moksha. Anupriya says nothing. Malhar comes to Kalyani and they take Moksha together. He kisses on Kalyani and Moksha's head. Kalyani rests her head on his shoulder. Sampada is in the parlor and calls Rachit. She tells him that he did a mistake by trying to kill Kalyani and tells that it is good that they doesn't know that she can't become pregnant. She says she is Hukam Kayaka and tells that both Kalyani and Malhar have to agree to her sayings. She says she will explain him about her plan and smirks. Kalyani tells Atarv that he doesn't know what happened there. Atarv says Baba must have said I love you. Kalyani says he said that I don't love me, how can he say that on my behalf? Atarv tells that Baba doesn't understand that you or I and loves everyone, so must be loving Baba too. Kalyani smiles and imagines Malhar coming to her and holding her romantically. Pelanasha song plays, Kalyani also smiles. Malhar dances with her. They both smiles. Malhar is about to go, but she doesn't let him go and dances with him. He covers her head with dupatta and looks at her while the sun rays fall on them. He kisses her forehead and smiles. Pelanasha song plays, it turns out to be her imagination. Atarv asks her to say if he loves Baba or not. Kalyani asks him to let her imagination completes. She continues to imagine Malhar and her under the dupatta and then it flying off their heads. Malhar makes her wear dupatta again. Pelanasha continues to play, he holds her and says you don't love me Kalyani. Her imagination ends. Kalyani tells Atarv that Malharji is very stupid and says he thinks that I don't love him. Atarv asks do you love Baba? Kalyani says yes, I love him so much, but realized it now. She says that's why whenever he is near me, I feel wind coming and the songs plays in background. She asks Moksha if she shall tell Baba. He nods his head. Malhar comes to the beauty parlor to nab Sampada with Rayo's help. He comes inside and looks at the lady sitting on the chair. Sardak tells Kalyani that Malhar must have traced her by now and goes. Kalyani tells Moksha that they will stay as a happy family, says she has to tell I love you to him and says she shall practice a bit. She makes him sit in front of her and says Malharji, I don't know when and where it happened, but love happened. She says it is filmy and thinks to try casual. She says Malharji, I love you too and says what is going on in life? She says I have to search something between casual and filmy. Malhar returns home. Atarv comes to Kalyani and says I heard Baba's jeep coming and asks her to go and handle him. He says I will handle Bilu. Kalyani tells Moksha that she will come. Kalyani comes out and collides with Table, thinks of Malhar's love confession.